Why mornings and bedtimes go off the rails. Hello and welcome back to the Resilient Kid podcast with me, Ash Costello, psychotherapist. So, how is January treating you? Back into it, back into the routine. And I've had quite a few kind of parents reach out, some teachers as well, that have just reached out and said, do you know what, Ashley, this is really difficult. So, this is why today we're talking about mornings and bedtimes, because if things feel wobbly right now, chances are it's those two pressure points. So you might be noticing harder mornings, slower starts, more resistance, maybe battles around bedtime, big emotions just when everyone is really feeling tired. So last week on the podcast, we talked about how January is particularly hard. And I thought, actually, after the questions that we'd had, let's have a look at this in relation to, fitting in back into that routine in January as well. And if you're thinking, why is it so hard? They were fine before the holidays. I felt like I just got into the routine. Don't worry, nothing is broken. We are just seeing the nervous system recalibrating after huge change. December is all about change, all about the upset of the routine, which doesn't make us feel safe. We don't feel safe with change. We don't like change generally. So I want to explain why that happens, what's going on in the brain for our kids and teens, and most importantly, what helps. So stick around to the end where we go through practical strategies that's really going to help you. So the brain after the holidays, why transitions are hard. Let's start off with the brain. Children, teens, all of us humans, brains thrive on predictability. That predictability and rhythm. Holidays, even lovely ones, whether it's Christmas, whether it's summer, disrupt both of those. During time off, we often, see later bedtimes for us as well as the kids, irregular mornings. We can very easily get overstimulated, everything from, new sights, new sounds, and that could be going to an airport, going to a new place, Christmas decorations even, Christmas songs, all that kind of thing is adding more stimulation to the brain. There's less structure around it. With that less routine comes less structure. And so it's almost inevitable that we will see those emotional highs and lows. And that includes us as parents and educators as well, because we're trying to say, we're trying to balance all that, aren't we? So when routines disappear, the brain relies more heavily on the stress response system to cope with that unpredictability. And we talked a little bit about it last week. The system is centered around the amygdala, which is our brain's alarm system. We often call it the guard dog, and the autonomic nervous system, so that fight, flight, freeze. So when school starts again, when we get back into the routines of work and school, the brain doesn't go, way back to normal. It says, hold on a minute, change again. So our brain just gets used to certain stuff, and then we get back into a routine and our brain goes, hold on, more change. So that's why we often see kids and teens' behaviour kind of spike before it improves. And it's not because children are pushing boundaries on purpose, it's because their thinking brain, and we talked a little bit about this last week, about there is no more capacity for them. They are already tired. Okay, so why? Let's have a look, drill down into mornings specifically. Why are mornings so hard? So mornings are a little bit of a perfect storm. From a brain and behaviour perspective, mornings require organisation, time awareness, which, let's be honest, lots of kids and teens haven't got that. We need emotional regulation for it to run smoothly, and that kind of cooperation and flexibility. If you've only got one kid at home, and don't forget when I say kid, I'm talking right up, well into the 20s. If you've only got one at home, then there's not much flexibility needed. realistically, however, we know that just another human being into the mix, we have to have that cooperation. Who's got the milk? Have you got my bag? You've taken my pens, blah, 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 blah. So all of these skills sit in the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that develops very slow. We're talking into the 30s now, is easily disrupted by stress. And that is also perceived stress. And it works less well when we are either tired and pin your ears back, rushed. And I cannot tell you how many times I've done it. I have spoken to other parents and it's like, come on, we're going to be late. Worst thing we can do. So think about after the holidays, after any period where we're out of sync, we've had off our usual routine, that system is completely under-resourced. So think about it in a work situation, 20 staff, and only 10 of them have returned in January. That's what the brain is like. Slowly, all those other members of staff, the other half of the staff team will come in dribs and drabs, and eventually, the end of Jan, they'll be back to a full workforce. That's what it feels like for the brain, okay? So what we often see as parents is refusal, distraction, tears, anger, isolation, disruption, shutdown. Do I need to go on? It isn't them trying to manipulate us, although I think sometimes we think that it is. It's often a child or a teen whose workforce hasn't caught up with the demand yet. The workforce hasn't shown up. So I hope that kind of makes a little bit of sense there. So how do we realistically build resilient mornings? Well, let's talk about what actually helps mornings feel calmer. Not perfect, that's really important, but calmer. So first of all, start with regulation. So before you're giving direction, help the nervous system settle. This might look like calm voice, gentle check-in, physical connection, whether that's pat on the back, a hug, a cuddle, sit close to them. Regulated brains are more cooperative, and what we know is that being near us, innately, our kids will pick up on that. If we're calm, they will be calm. Also, think about food options, because our brain often perceives threat where there might not be one, but it might perceive a threat. If we're eating, that threat goes away. That perceived threat goes away, because if we was in the savannah, because this is where our amygdala is still, when we were in caves, our amygdala is still from that time. As evolved as we are as human species, the amygdala is still from those times. So if we was in the savannah, we wouldn't be sitting and eating if there was a tiger coming across to us. So eating calms our nervous system. It tells the body, it's okay, we're safe. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Reduce decisions, okay? So we've talked about start with regulation, not instructions. The second one I want to say is reduce decisions. Decision making drains that prefrontal cortex. It drains that capacity, that little workforce we've just talked about. So clothes ready the night before, get the bags at the door, everything already sorted, limit breakfast options. Now, in my household, what we do is we probably have a cooked breakfast 2 to 3 times a week, right? This is not a full English by any stretch, okay? It might be scrambled eggs and toast. It might be beans on toast. That's all. Like, it's nothing major. I will sometimes cook sausages the night before, throw them in the microwave, okay? It's not a big thing. It is to get them to eat so that there is lots of protein there to sustain them through the morning, because protein is what helps them focus. It is what helps them concentrate at school before they have their lunch. So, but what I would say to you is, on those mornings, and this is why I'm telling you, there is no choice in my house. this is what we're having. Like, you're having scrambled eggs, you're having beans on toast, right? So it's very, very limited. If you're having cereal, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Be aware of the sugar content though. And the reason I say that is because if you have got a high sugar content, don't want to shame anyone, as in the companies, not you guys, but Cocoa Pops, very high sugar content. Yes, they've made a thing about how it makes the milk brown. However, what happens is our young people it spikes their insulin, and they're likely to have a crash just around within the first hour of school. So just as, they might have been in the playground, they might have had assembly, they come, have the register, all of that. They're just settling down to either English or maths, if it's primary, because that's quite often morning subjects. If it's secondary, it's kind of first lesson, second lesson, they're going to have a crash in concentration because there's too much sugar in the system. That's why we have protein. So for instance, we'll have granola or, some kind of cereal, but if we're having granola, which is quite sugary, we will have Greek yogurt and fruit with it to put in the protein. So if you're going to have milk, so the calcium will just smooth out that sugar a little bit for you. Okay, but the most important thing is limit the options for breakfast. Don't have a running buffet. Don't have 55 different cereals. It's this or this. That's it. And then also, if you have got younger ones or neurodiverse kids, have visual routines rather than verbal ones. Because what you're doing there is they can check in and you're not nagging them. You don't have to nag them all the time. So, you can do first thing, don't forget this, then this. Get them to work out their own routine. Quite a lot of our coaches, we do spend, some time on this because it's not only for the kids, but actually for the parents as well. So what do they do first, in what order? Big tip I can give you is get them ready. They get ready before they come down for breakfast. So we have just had a family where we've completely upended their morning because there was lots of meltdowns, lots of crying in the morning, couldn't to get out the door. They were late most days. And actually what we realised is kids were coming down, having the breakfast in front of the TV, and then going up and getting ready and actually getting distracted, or it was really hard to pull them away from TV or screens or whatever. So what we did was, with the child, we talked about, is this working? No. Okay, let's have a look at how else we can do it. They get ready before they go downstairs. If they are all ready, and I'm talking shoes, everything, like absolutely, are they ready? Then they have the breakfast. And if they've got time, then they can watch TV until a certain time when they need to be ready to leave. And it's worked really, really well. Now, for me, I don't put TV on. We don't have screens in the morning. Radio is on, so there's a little bit of distraction there. We can listen along to the quiz or the music or whatever, but there is no TV. And that is purely because it's really hard to pull them away from screens. So that's my top tip for there. So we're not lowering expectations. And I think last week when we was talking about January being hard, it's, we're not lowering the expectations, we're just making it calmer, and particularly for mornings, when you are reducing those decisions, you're removing the unnecessary cognitive load for them in the morning, and so they don't get overwhelmed. Third tip for calmer mornings, build in that buffer time. So a rushed nervous system triggers stress, triggers that stress response. Often when we see kids getting anxious in the morning, this is because the stress response has been triggered. Building in an extra 5 or 10 minutes can reduce shouting, it can reduce tears, and that power struggle. You do as you're told, get your shoes on, all of that. So think of it as a bit like insurance. Having that extra 5 or 10 minutes is building in that emotional insurance for you all. And then thirdly, use what I call kind of connection scripts, simple, steady language that helps them feel safe. And once you start to use these phrases, they will help the kids, irrespective of age, will start to understand they're okay, they're safe. So we'll do it together. You don't have to rush. I'm here to help you with the steps. And this is just about trying to co-regulate how they're feeling. So, okay, what do you need next? What can I do to help you? And I think as a parent, the biggest kind of shift in mornings for me, and something that I speak to probably more mums than dads, I'm going to be honest, are the ones who are at home and seeing the kids off at school, to school, should I say, is around being there for them, but actually making sure your stuff's done before they even get up. So like for me, I get up earlier than the kids. I make sure I'm ready. If I've got to leave the door, if I've got to leave at the same time, or if I'm going shortly afterwards, mine are old enough to take themselves now to school, which is awesome. However, if I'm going to go out fairly soon, my bag is at the door. I know what clothes I'm going to wear the next day, or certainly kind of, in my head, I've prepped that. So literally as we've had breakfast, it's away and then they're out the door. Because if I'm not prepped, if I'm late, say I've not got up in time, or, the alarm's not gone off, something like that, then I'm rushing, I'm stressed. I pass that on. I absolutely know that. And we do, don't we? If we're stressed, we pass it on to the kids as well. So being organised yourself as a parent or a carer really, really helps. So we've looked at the morning. Let's have a look at the evening times. Why do bedtimes fall apart after the holidays? Well, it's often where everything spills out. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because by the evening, children have used up their coping resources, usually at school. They've held it together all day. Their stress hormones are higher, and their thinking brain is tired. It's fatigued by this point. So for many children, many teens, especially if they're anxious or sensitive, bedtime is when anxiety or worry surfaces, emotions rise, and that resistance appears. It is usually a time for me as well that I find they're seeking out connection. So if you add in holiday disruption, shift in sleeping patterns, the nervous system really struggles to kind of downshift. Because sleep is not just about tiredness. I mean, how many times when you've got a small baby, have you gone, they're really tired, why don't they just sleep? It's not about that. Sometimes it's about feeling safe enough to let go. And we know, particularly with teens, particularly with, those kind of kids that are year 5, year 6, sometimes bedtime is the only time that they feel safe enough to just let it all out. And again, prep yourself for that. If you have got a teen that kind of goes to bed similar time or sometimes later than you, make sure you've given them some space and some time to chat before you want to go off to bed. So how do we create calmer bedtimes without the battles? So first of all, protect the wind down time. So because sleep, our brain starts to pick up signals about sleep way before bedtime. So aim for dimmer lights. In our front room, our lounge, we don't ever have like the big light on. I sound like Peter Kay. We have lamps on at night. So as it's going dark, the lamps go on. Everything's at a slower pace. It's very predictable as well. So we will have dinner, we will clean up after dinner. There's nothing wrong with then saying, get your PJs on. And sometimes my teens will do that. If they're not doing anything else or they're not, got anything else to do, we'll go, should we just watch TV? So, for instance, a really good one for us is that we watch together is something like Traitors. Used to be Strictly, they've kind of grown out of that a little bit now. Used to be Bake Off again, grown out of it a little bit. But Traitors is a perfect one because it's not very long, and that's their time that we have together, half an hour, 40 minutes, and then they'll go up to their rooms. If you've got younger ones, kind of have that predictable, whether it's bath, story, bed, whatever your routine is, make it the same as much as possible. Just reduce that simulation and also make sure screens are not there. We know about blue light. I don't need to tell you about that. But consistency matters more than clock time. And it's really funny. We have travelled quite a bit with our kids, and it wouldn't matter where we were. The actual steps of bedtime when they were younger always looked the same. Always. So it didn't matter if I was staying at my mum's, going on holiday abroad, wherever it was, the routine was always the same before bed. And that just helped really settle them. And that included getting on flights. So we would literally have them we would take a night flight and we would literally put them in pajamas, right? This is what's happening. Here's your teddy that you take everywhere. They don't anymore, unfortunately. But, here's your teddy. You've had some milk, blah, 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 bed. And they would go to sleep really, really quickly. So that consistency is what matters the most, because it's telling your brains like predictability. It's going, it must be nearly sleep time. Keep your conversations light, because we know, and this is particularly for teens, is that when we're tired, our brains can't problem solve the same way. So if worries come up, if concerns, particularly if you've got an adolescent and, they're going to bed, acknowledge what they're saying. Say, let's talk about this tomorrow because, maybe we're both tired, and reassure them. Don't try and fix it. Just reassure them. Let them know you've heard what they've said. Let them talk without, interrupting or trying to problem solve. And then, say something like, that sounds really important. Why don't we write it down and we'll talk about it over breakfast? And make that conscious effort to do that in the morning. The next my third point would be used body-based calming. So our nervous system really likes physical cues. So something like water, like warm baths or showers, is really good. Big hugs. And when I say big hugs, what I mean, like a bear hug, is that deep pressure, like a firm hug, weighted blanket. It was one of the big reasons why we started to sell weighted blankets, because there wasn't very good ones out there. They were really expensive. And actually, I think a lot of them are marketed towards neurodiverse kids, which they are great, irrespective. Kid, teen, adult, they are brilliant. Make sure you go for the weight that is appropriate. So that's why we have two sizes. If you've got a smaller kid, I think it's under 20k, you would have the smaller one. If you're above 20k, then you would have the heavier one. But they are really, really good, because what it does is calms the nervous system down. So even if they're sat on the couch with the blanket on them, or they're going to get in bed with them, it just tells their nervous system they are safe. And then also as well, slow breathing with longer out breaths. That exhale, make that longer. So I will quite often do this. If I see one of the teens getting upset, getting anxious, I will start to exaggerate my breathing. Now, I'm not talking about or anything like that. But what I am talking about is that real breathing, and just slowly do that while you're listening, because innately they will copy. When you go to the doctors and trying to check your reflexes and they hit your knee and your knee jerks up, it's an innate reaction. It's something that we're born with. That's what happens to kids and teens. If we start really breathing deeply, they will follow us, and therefore they will start to calm down. It's a little signal that just tells the brain they're safe. And then the other one, which is a little bit like, sounds counterintuitive, but reduce the pressure to sleep. So, anxious children and teens often try too hard to sleep. So, what I always try and do is reframe it a little bit and say, your job is to rest, sleep will come when it's ready. So, reading before bed, having some, nice instrumental music, things like that will really help. But what I would say is, you just lie there, do whatever, just rest. Don't worry about falling asleep. That will come when you're ready. But just, close your eyes if you want to read, but just rest. Just let your body rest for a little while. And then that removes that kind of performance anxiety. I can't sleep, which actually then means they can't sleep. Okay, so a little note for parents and carers around this. I hope the morning and evening routines have been helpful for you. And I know that particularly in January, it might be stretching you right now. But what I would say to you is, these are the moments when your own nervous system is tired, patience is definitely thinner on the ground, and that is where self-doubt creeps in. So check in with yourself first. How am I doing? How's my sleep? How's my mornings? How am I feeling organised? Am I feeling overwhelmed? Check in with yourself, because, when we start a bit like sleep, when we go, I can't sleep, you suddenly can't sleep. But actually, it's the same with parenting and when we're looking after kids. When we start doubting ourselves, that's when it gets worse. That's that self-doubt creeping in starts to undermine all the good work that we do as parents and carers. So remember, behaviour is information. It's a way that we communicate. And progress it's not a linear line, is it? Progress is, tonight was better than last night. This morning was better than yesterday. That's what matters. And don't forget, we don't have to get this parenting malarkey right all the time. It only has to be right 30% of the time, and they still turn out okay. Repair matters more than getting it right, more than being perfect. It's not about winning at all. It's not about winning the mornings, winning the evenings, all right? It's about supporting their nervous system through the transition. We've come from a very busy December into January. Give yourself a break. All right. And what really builds that resilience isn't about pressure or perfection. It's when children and teens, our children and teens, experience them predictable rhythms, emotional safety, and support through the hard times, because we are built for hard times, but actually kids need support. Sometimes we all need support through that. So after the holidays, mornings and bedtimes are where resiliently is quietly rebuilt, but it's one calm interaction at a time. It's not all at once. Thank you for listening to the Resilient Kid podcast and me, Ash Costello. If this episode helped, please share it with a parent, carer, educator who's finding mornings or bedtimes tough right now. And remember, you're supporting a little human being here, and their very developing brain. And that's really meaningful. That's hard work. So well done. If you want to get in touch, if you want to put forward a suggestion for a podcast, or you want to sign up for the newsletter, check us out at theresilientkid.co.uk or drop me an email, ashley@theresilientkid.co.uk. Find us on the socials. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.